There are people who move through life like silent shadows, always present but never fully seen. They smile at the right moments, nod in agreement, and maintain perfectly controlled expressions that reveal absolutely nothing. To the outside world, they seem calm, stable, and even admirable for their emotional self-control. But beneath that surface lies a storm they refuse to let out. People who hide their true emotions aren't simply private or reserved. They are often individuals who learned from a young age that revealing their feelings leads to danger, rejection, or punishment. So, as adults, they develop a psychological armor that shields them from vulnerability. They suppress anger, sadness, fear, and even joy, convinced that any display of raw emotion could make them appear weak or expose them to harm. And over time, they become strangers to their own inner world, unable to recognize the feelings they keep buried. 2. What makes emotional concealment so fascinating is that it rarely begins as a conscious choice. Many people who hide their emotions grew up in environments where expressing themselves was either unsafe or useless. Maybe their parents dismissed their feelings, mocked their sensitivity, or punished them for being too emotional. Others experienced chaotic households where expressing vulnerability felt like adding fuel to the fire. So they learned, little by little, that the only safe path was to become invisible. As adults, this habit evolves into a coping mechanism. They avoid conflict by staying silent, avoid intimacy by staying guarded, and avoid disappointment by never letting others know what they truly think or feel. They master neutrality, and neutrality becomes their identity. What they don't realize is that emotional suppression is not emotional control. It is emotional self-abandonment. 3. People who hide their emotions often become experts at reading others. This may sound surprising, but when you grow up in an environment where you must anticipate danger, you naturally develop heightened observation skills. They notice subtle changes in tone, micro-expressions, and shifts in energy around them. They can read anger before it is spoken, sense tension before it is acknowledged, and detect dishonesty without needing proof. This ability comes from survival instincts. They needed to understand others so they could adapt their behavior and stay safe. But this talent comes at a cost. They become hyper-aware of others and under-aware of themselves. Their emotional radar is always turned outward, never inward, leaving them disconnected from their own needs. They know exactly what others feel, but rarely allow themselves to feel anything fully. 4. Ironically, people who hide their emotions often appear extremely predictable and calm on the outside. Yet internally, they experience intense emotions that they simply don't know how to release. Emotional suppression doesn't eliminate feelings, it traps them. Over time, the trapped emotions build pressure, like steam inside a sealed container. That pressure may show up as anxiety, irritability, insomnia, sudden sadness, or unexplained exhaustion. Their bodies carry the weight of every unspoken word, every swallowed feeling, every ignored need. They may not cry, scream, or argue, but their physiology expresses what their voice cannot. Their minds become cluttered with thoughts they never verbalize, and this inner silence can become deafening. Suppressing emotions is like holding your breath. Eventually, the body begs for air, whether you want it to or not. 5. A common misconception is that emotionally hidden people don't want intimacy. In reality, they crave connection deeply, but they fear it even more. Their biggest fear is being seen too clearly. If someone gets too close, their carefully crafted emotional armor might crack, revealing the vulnerable, unhealed parts they've kept hidden for years. They avoid deep conversations, not because they lack depth, but because depth exposes them. They prefer predictable routines and controlled environments where nothing unpredictable can trigger emotional exposure. Even in relationships, they may seem distant or detached, not because they don't care, but because caring too much makes them feel exposed. They genuinely love people, but they love from behind a locked emotional door. 6. For these individuals, the idea of expressing feelings feels dangerous. They imagine scenarios where honesty leads to conflict, rejection, or humiliation. They often rehearse conversations in their minds, imagining the worst outcomes. This creates emotional perfectionism. They believe that unless they can express themselves perfectly, it's safer to say nothing at all. Their silence becomes a shield. But this avoidance slowly damages relationships, because others interpret their emotional restraint as indifference, even though that's the furthest thing from the truth. Emotional suppression creates misunderstandings, distance, and resentment, even when the silent person has the purest intentions. They don't realize that speaking imperfectly is still better than never speaking at all. 7. Inside emotionally hidden people lives a deep, unspoken loneliness. Even when surrounded by friends or family, they feel isolated because no one truly knows them. Their relationships remain superficial, not because they lack depth, but because they refuse to share that depth with others. They experience love, fear, anger, and sadness intensely, but they endure it all alone. They might be the strong one in the family or the calm friend everyone relies on, but no one realizes how heavy their silence really is. Their emotional isolation becomes a habit, a way of life, and the longer they hide, the harder it becomes to open up. Their greatest longing is for someone who understands them, but understanding requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is their greatest fear. 8. People who hide their emotions often struggle with self-worth. Deep down, many believe their feelings are inconvenient, unimportant, or burdensome. They were taught, implicitly or explicitly, that their emotions don't matter. So they continue that narrative into adulthood. Why bother expressing myself? It won't change anything. This mindset slowly erodes their sense of identity. When you silence yourself long enough, you lose yourself. Their emotional world becomes muted, not because they lack emotions, but because they've silenced them for so long that they no longer recognize their own voice. 9. But emotional concealment isn't permanent. People can learn to reconnect with their feelings through self-reflection, therapy, journaling, or opening up to someone trustworthy. The process is slow and uncomfortable because it requires dismantling years of emotional armor. They must learn that vulnerability is not weakness, it is humanity. They must learn that expressing emotions does not make them unsafe, it makes them real. Healing begins with small acts, admitting they feel tired, acknowledging when something hurts, allowing themselves to cry, sharing a thought they usually suppress. These small steps slowly rebuild emotional awareness, and with it, the capacity for genuine connection. 10. Ultimately, the psychology of people who hide their emotions is a story of survival. They learn to protect themselves in the only way they knew how. But what once protected them now limits them. Their silence kept them safe, but now it keeps them isolated. Their emotional armor, once necessary, now weighs them down. The journey forward is not about forcing emotional expression, but about reclaiming the parts of themselves they once buried. When they finally allow themselves to be seen not perfectly, but authentically, they discover something powerful. The world is less dangerous than they feared, and connection is far more healing than they imagined. Emotional honesty becomes not just an act of courage, but an act of freedom.